Well, then I'd like to call a meeting to order. So please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, everyone. I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda or approve the agenda for tonight's meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Colette, if you don't mind, could you please record this in Cammie's absence?
Yeah, I'm doing it.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, so seeing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the agenda for tonight's meeting, we'll do a roll call. Myself, yes. Colette?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Larry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And then that'll be enough. Cammie, and as I said earlier, to not only my board colleagues, but to the general public that are attending, that Director Janasek couldn't make it. He had work-related conflict, and he will not be joining us this evening. That being said, the next item on the agenda is President's Remarks. I have none for this evening. This is a special meeting that we wanted to call to have a discussion. The agenda was published, and we can move forward. So with that, I'll open it up for public comments. Please be advised two things. Number one, public comments, as in all meetings, please say your name and your address. And also for tonight's meeting, since it is a special meeting, the public comments are restricted to the items on the agenda. In this case, a discussion of 91 Abbeyshire Road complaints. So therefore, I'm going to open the floor for public comments and just ask that just since we have several folks, if somebody could just sort of say their name real quick, and then we'll recognize you, and we'll try to do this in a very organized fashion. So the floor is now open for public comment.
My name is Bill Fenn. I reside in 93 Abbeyshire, right next to 91. I think you probably all know my name because I've been sending out emails. I've probably sent 5 or 6 emails, outlining my points of view, and I've tried to offer what I think might be some solutions, not really knowing if they can be enforced legally or not.
Mr. Fenn, can you stop for 1 second? Folks that are attending the meeting, please put your microphones on mute. There's always a lot of background noise. I know it's unintended, but in order for us to conduct a conversation and hear the public comments, only one person can speak at a time. So if you're not talking and you're not part of the board, please mute your microphone, and we'll get to you in time if you want to make a public comment. Thank you. Mr. Fenn, please.
Were you able to hear everything I said, or should I start over?
We heard it, but please continue.
So from my standpoint, I think, I've put in emails to the directors, my experiences, my feelings, and some suggestions, and I'm here tonight to hopefully listen to what the Ocean Pines may be able to do to resolve this. So that's really all I have for an opening type statement.
Okay, so noted. The floor is now continued to be open for public comments. Is there anyone else that wants to make a public comment? You can unmute your microphone and state your name, and we'll recognize you. Last call for public comments. You should try to give a little more time in case you need to unmute your microphone or do something, but give it another minute. Other public comments. The floor is open for public comments. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the floor for public comments and move into the item that we have on the agenda under new business. It's a discussion for complaints at 91 Abbeyshire. I think, Frank, I think it was you that called the meeting or called the discussion.
Steve.
Steve, why don't you start us off, please?
Sure. I mean, we've all been getting the emails from various people that either live or right around the 91 Abbyshire. It's a very, very serious problem. We've seen the trash piled out there. We've seen, I think all the directors have been by there at least once, if not more, and seeing the cars. I was over there Sunday, and there were about 6 cars in the driveway and a big truck parked on the side of the road. And we certainly heard from various residents with concerns about the noise and the disruption in the middle of the night, and it's just unacceptable. And so I wanted us to at least have a conversation and see what, if anything, we could do as an association. I did have a conversation today with Chip Bertino, our commissioner that represents our area. He has talked with Jennifer in zoning. They have been able to contact the owner of the property, and my understanding is that the owner is starting a process to seek a license for the property, which requires a number of steps on the part of the owner, as I think you all know, providing a floor plan of the building, the size of the bedrooms, all the different things that have to be submitted in order to be approved for a license. I raised the question with Chip. I said, you know, it's an unacceptable situation right now. The people that are actually renting the building do not have a license, and that the disturbances are unacceptable, and they've been advertising this property without a license. And so he picked up on that, and he has asked Jennifer to seek to prepare a citation against the property, which from what he told me, it's like $25 for the first day and then $100 a day after that, for the period of time that they advertise without a license. So whether that will bring enough pressure on them to stop what they're doing, I don't know, but that's basically where the county's at right now with it. It's really the county regs that I think should control this, but they don't have, from what I can see, they're not ready to enforce anything yet, really, in any significant way.
Yeah, I'd like. Hold on, let me make a comment too. So to echo, and then we'll get Cammie and then Colette. So to echo what Steve said, yes, I think to a person, every one of the directors has physically been by the property at 91 Abbyshire, myself included, and yeah, it's the condition is just deplorable at this point. We as Steve said, we contacted Chip. We looked through the regulations. What's interesting is it defines a couple of points regarding the definition of a bedroom or a sleeping area that the county has defined when they passed that law a couple of months ago. It also looks at the number of occupants per square foot, all right, which is interesting. I think it frames it properly. But what's missing from the legislation that they passed is what can we do to enforce this, and what, if any, are the penalties there? So it's kind of a void right now, and they've sort of put it on us. So I think this is number one. Although it might be a little bit of an obtuse comment, it's good that this is happening, because now we definitely have to take action. Right now we can't depend on the county for any immediate action, but certainly we want to work with them for the long-term action. The other thing I did, and I shared with the rest of the directors, and I'm saying this for the benefit of the folks that are watching the meetings, I sent a note to Airbnb registering the complaint and basically telling them that the activities at that house do not favorably represent the organization or the company Airbnb, and they definitely need to be looking into it. So they responded back with, they assigned a case number, et cetera, but it's only been 2 days. I'd like to think that they would have at least gotten back to us with something, but they are still looking into it. So we offered it on that front as well. I think that, personally, I think that we have to do something to make it, at least elicit help from the county to stay coordinated with them, especially in regard to a citation, as Steve had mentioned, and we certainly are now on notice that we have to really kind of pursue this a little bit further to see what other legal ramifications are available for us. Certainly the long term is a little bit easier because we can navigate through, and I think we generally have an idea. We need to vet it out. It's more, I think my personal concern is what can we do immediately to try to eliminate or at the very least minimize this problem. So this is going to be a good discussion. I just want to set expectations accordingly that hopefully we'll get enough input from everybody. I thank Mr. Fenn, and I think it was Ms. McMahon and one other person, very good detailed information that has been quite helpful in framing this whole scenario and giving us some some background information so we can move forward. So that's my statement. I had Cammie next and then Colette. Cammie.
Vicky is trying to get on. She had a message flashing that she's been trying to get on to the comments and can't. So I don't know if there's anybody there that can take care of that, just as an FYI. Point number one, Steve, thanks for starting to delve into this. I really, I think that you have really taken us down a really good place. And I understand that from the looks of this place, Colette and I rode by there the other day, and then Paul and I rode by again, and it is just a horrible, horrible atrocity. And I saw the beds in the garage. I sent you all, for means of education, a memo that my paralegal put together, and I had to goose her up on the timeline because we met today. And I think that she raises some very good points in there. Steve, you had indicated that in the DRs for Section 6, there were violations at number 8, M, O, and S. She also felt that there were violations. My concern is, and somebody else needs to help me with this, if we are an HOA, why is it that we have to go to the county for enforcement? Can somebody, because in my mind, we have someone who is leasing this property for a year to year, and I guess that person has pseudo ownership of the property, because the owner apparently, the true owner has probably bought this as simply a rental property. I know that we probably are going to need to contact Jeremy at some point, but with the covenants of private enjoyment, which we have in our documents, why is it that we can't evict these people? Does any?
Can I
I can answer that, but so before we do that, Frank, hold on one second. Colette, I'm sorry, Cammie, we'll get back to that question. Colette, did you want to say something before we answer Cammie's question?
Just briefly, Steve, if you said that there's a fine that the county can impose, if they can impose a fine, do they have no mechanism for collecting on that fine?
My understanding is they oppose a fine. I assume it would go against the property eventually.
So the property taxes, so it would be added to the property taxes?
That would be I did not specifically ask that question of Chip. I assume that's how it would work, just because the same way we would attach something to someone's assessment.
Okay. Yeah, and so I think we need something that actually penalizes the sublessor.
Exactly.
The lesser, and the owner of the property. And so I think that's going to take something in the way of changing our DRs. And Frank is, kind of starting us down that road. But I agree with Doug that we're also going to have to coordinate with the county on enforcement.
Yeah, and Frank, 1 second, and you're next. So Cammie, the problem, and it's been this way for quite a bit, is that while there's a lot of detailed information within our declarations of restrictions for each one of the sections, there's no component for fining. We don't have the authority to fine. All right. We had this discussion about a year ago, and the idea of, not for this particular issue, but just the fining in general, for non-compliance of any one of the portions of the declarations of restrictions for a specific section. So that's where we're kind of heading. In the conversation I had with Jeremy, he said really it's probably the time to look at the feasibility of putting some sort of ability for the HOA to fine violations of this degree, at least that are specifically associated with the DRs. And I think, and the DRs are where to do it. So we started that discussion. We don't have any additional detail. Certainly the motion that's out on the floor that Frank proposed, is a good one for the July meeting that's coming up, to really kind of do the research and find out exactly what we can do, with regard to moving forward. So Frank, please, you're next.
Yeah, I guess, Cammie, to specifically answer your question, and there's a little bit of twists and turns depending on section, but basically any section that was brought into Ocean Pines prior to 1995, as Doug said, we do not have the authority to levy fines. And I think Abbyshire is clearly in one of those sections.
Yeah.
Post 1995, there are sections where the board of directors can levy fines with a vote of 4 directors. Okay. But I think the basic issue is this, and with this 91 Abbyshire and anything, it's kind of I'll draw the parallel with another property that we have. And because of the Maryland Homeowners Association, well, I can't give you the specific address, although we got an email on it from John probably within the last 3 weeks. But I believe in 2004, one of the homes was cited for violation of our declaration of restrictions for parking junked cars in their driveway. And Ocean Pines went to the point of getting a court order, an injunction, disjoining that party from doing that. They moved the cars, okay? And last year, the cars came back, and they may have been there for a long time before that. So we started down the process of enforcing our declaration of restrictions. And the way that it works is the attorney does his thing, and then went to the court, filed the complaint. The owner of that home has 30 days to respond. If they fight that in any way, I think that you're aware with what you do, and certainly with the situation now in the courts, it'll be well past October before we get a court date to air our grievance against that property. And for something like 91 Abbyshire, when somebody's talking at 2 o'clock in the morning and there's a loud party going on and it's keeping you awake, a solution where we go to an attorney, they file a complaint, it takes 30 days for somebody to answer, and if they fight it, we get a court date 4 months down the road, just doesn't work. It's just not going to work. So I think we have 2 choices in handling it. And choice number 1 is to try to go in front of the community and get fines. Now, I can tell you when we tried that in last year, there was a lot of pushback, a whole lot of pushback. And it's, I would say, certainly questionable that over the array of all of our homeowners, they would do that. The second thing, and I think this is what we should really pursue, is when we met with the county commissioners and when we went to the meeting in Snow Hill, the county commissioners basically said, this idea of overnight rentals is largely an Ocean Pines problem. We are the largest unincorporated community in the county. Berlin, Snow Hill, Pocomoke, Ocean City handles this with ordinances that they pass through their town council. We can't do that. But the commissioners made it pretty clear that they would be willing to work with us with text amendments, but it was in our the ball's in our ballpark to ask them for those amendments. So, and I think we made a wise decision. I've talked with Doug several times about this, to go on the agenda. And the issue has always been the county fleshing out its requirements for enforcing the regulations and, just let's say for enforcing their regulations. Well, those enforcements came out and it turns out they're largely voluntary. And what shocked me as we go through this thing, number one, that piece of legislation from the county doesn't specify any penalties. It says you may be penalized by this, that, or the other thing. There's no penalties, number one. And number two, it just completely blew me away that the county's reaction when the residents were talking with the county that their hands were tied. I mean, so, I'm not sure what all that's about, and that's above a pay grade higher than us. But we can certainly go, and the chief last year gave us an example of a text amendment that we could go to the commissioners for noise. And where I'm at, and in my opinion, having been down this road of trying to find and change our DRs and everything like that, I think that for the motion on July 1st, to be completely candid, that I'm considering changing it to 2 parts. And I believe we can do this because our ground rules for a referendum is we have to be able to specifically answer yes or no to a question. But we can ask on the same ballot 2 disjointed questions. And question number 1 is, should we ban short-term rentals in Ocean Pines, period? And we go through our process there. Question number 2, worded properly, is should the board approach the county commissioners for a series of text amendments to regulate short-term rentals in Ocean Pines? And the reason I think we should have 2 questions is this. Last year when we were at hearings, the commissioners, according to their research, said that there were about 180 properties in Ocean Pines that were advertised in Airbnb and VBRO and similar sites for overnight rentals. We have problems with probably 2 or 3 of them. And the issue is, where are the other 177 that aren't causing problems? And second of all, where are all the property owners on renting them? Okay, I mean, letting these people rent them. So I think that we would be better off addressing the issues that these cause and being able to come in and ask the county for a piece of legislation that says, look, if you're making noise above us, like the chief gave us in his example, if you're making noise above a certain level at a certain time, you can be fined X number of dollars. I think the same thing with occupancy. I think we can do the same thing with trash. If we wanted to tackle it, we could do the same thing with parking. And we may be able to do some of that more quickly than others, but some of it, certainly we could address. And that way, we have an immediate way of enforcing it, because my understanding of the county legislation is that it can be enforced by, I'll call it, quote, a certified police force. I'm not exactly sure what the Maryland law requires, but I think that's the way that we should go. And the other thing I think we should ask for this type of legislation, because of one of the comments that the renter, not the renter, but the person renting the home who's contracted with Airbnb made to one of the residents was, fines don't particularly alarm him because he's making $400 a night. So my take on it is any fine should take a big bite out of his wallet, not $25. And number 2, I think we want to ask in some of that legislation, particularly for occupancy, if that occupancy limit for that square footage is exceeded, we want to have the authority to have groups in Ocean Pines evict the renters immediately. And that's what I think we should ask for. If we don't get it, we can go to more expensive route. And I think it's going to be a tough, the tough sell of going through all 22 sections and changing the DRs and completely locking them out. But that's kind of where I'm at after listening to everybody, because the residents on Abbyshire have a real serious problem and nobody has the right piece of law in their hands to correct it.
Doug?
Frank, point well taken. Actually, hold on. I got Cammie, Colette, and then Larry. Cammie, you're up.
2 things, Frank, and thank you for that. That was a really good explanation. But it sounds to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, that the county doesn't want to have interface with the DRs and the ordinances, well, not ordinances, but the rules for the road that we have established here. So it sounds to me like, from what you have been told, that there is really no enforcement mechanism that they can provide us. Is that correct?
Jeremy's opinion, I've heard it beyond Jeremy. I think every legal opinion I have, our police force cannot enforce our declaration of restrictions.
That is a correct statement.
And then the second part of my question is, you said that we can't or we don't levy fines. I understand that. I'm not sure why we don't do that, but we don't levy fines. Do you consider eviction to be a fine, or are you talking about monetary fines only? Because what they've had going on over in Abbyshire, anywhere else that we lived outside of an HOA, certainly those renters would be evicted for disturbing the peace and for the covenants. And the only other thing I want to mention is the district courts, which this would go to, are now functioning. They're taking a lot of hearings on Skype for Business. So I wouldn't be intimidated by that. And with that, I'll throw it back to you guys. But I guess my question is, Frank, do you consider eviction a fine? I mean, after all of your talks, is eviction a possibility somewhere down the road, or is that a fine?
Well, quite honestly, Cammie, in all the discussions we had last year about fines and all the exchanges with Jeremy, we never talked about eviction because we're talking about a homeowner who's residing in a home that refused to comply with the declaration of restrictions.
Right.
So evicting an owner from the house that they own is kind of a long, I mean, that's kind of a long shot, right? I think the only issue that I would have with eviction is, would I consider it a fine? I would consider it kind of the ultimate fine to both the person, to Airbnb, to the person that contracted with Airbnb, and to the people that rented. The issue is, and I'm not sure what the Maryland law is, and what the county's take on this would be, who does the eviction? I mean, because the only really organization that we have inside Ocean Pines that can enforce county regulations is our police force.
Right.
So, very good point, Cammie. Thanks for the question. Before we get to Colette, Mr. Finn, I'm looking at the chat here in the meeting. He posted a question of how long is a short-term rental or overnight rental? When we went to the county meetings, the discussion of the definition of a short-term rental was, at the time, was less than 28 days. So, it would cover ones that are, a week or so. I think that also needs to be fleshed out a little bit more because it's not clear that, that the information, that we have is up to date and obviously enforceable. But I think it's a question we need to take back to the county and get clarification, very clear understanding of exactly what they mean by short-term rental, because I think we're going to face the issue with regard to, somebody's definition of a short-term rental and saying, are you telling me per the HOA rules that, I can't rent it out to friends of mine for, for 2 weeks, during the summer because of these restrictions. So I think that's going to be, we will find that out as we navigate through this entire process and try to get to some, reasonable suggestion. So there's one other question. Melanie Coffin, has anyone contacted Airbnb for the problem owners? The answer is yes, we did. I did that the other day, and we're waiting to hear back from Airbnb. We registered a complaint. We have a case number, and we'll see where that goes. So I'd like to Colette, you're next, and then Larry.
Okay, Frank, you made a statement about the scope of the problem, and I'm not sure we have any idea of what the true scope of the problem is. The people at Abbyshire have been suffering for 3 years, and we've heard about this problem now. My guess is that there are other people who are suffering with this problem that we have not heard from, and I hope we do hear from what the problem is, but I don't want to make any assumptions that this is the only property that is having these kind of problems. The other point I want to make has to do with enforcement. And I'm fully in support of the idea of figuring out how either Ocean Pines or the county or both would be able to secure the power of eviction of the people who engage in the short-term rental, and possibly the lessor, the person who contracts with Airbnb, that they could be evicted, their lease could be terminated through an eviction process. So they no longer have the ability to do short-term rentals. But I also want us to look at putting into RDRs, having a prohibition against subletting so that we don't have 2 degrees removed from the owner of the property when we run into these kind of problems. So we have closer ability to engage in fining or other forms of enforcement that may be effective. The other issue I think that I would be in favor of is revoking all privileges of membership of the owner of the property as long as the property is in violation of rental related DR, language that hopefully we're going to put in place. And that would include not being able to vote and being banned from the use of any of our amenities by the owner, the person that the owner rents from, and any guests. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Colette. Larry, you're next.
Yeah, from all the discussion we're having tonight, there's a couple things for me. First off, what we're really talking about is long-term solutions. After talking with the residents over on Abbyshire, I don't know what can be done on an immediate basis. I think that all the issues we've discussed so far, I think we're going to need legal opinions on what is the way to go here. I'm not a lawyer, but I got to tell you, having seen eviction stuff in the past, I find it very hard to believe we're going to be able to, if there's a complaint today and we're going to be able to send our police force over there and evict somebody tomorrow. I find it hard to believe we would be able to do that, but then again, I don't know for sure. So I think the other issue we need to recognize here too is, and I know Frank, your position regarding your motion was about limiting the rentals to at least a week. I don't think the time of the rental is the problem. I think the problem is the number of people in the home, and of course the cars and everything else. So I'm not so sure, when we get down to doing something long-term that we address, that we need to address the short-term, long-term issue. I think more importantly, we have to address the occupancy issue of the homes. And quite honestly, in talking with Vicki McMahon and Bill, when I was at the premises, they both expressed the same opinion. It's not the length of time, it's the number of I think if I'm getting anything out of this today, I think what we need to do is we need to have a serious work session, either with Joe Moore or Jeremy on this thing, and determine exactly what is legal that we can do, and what corrections we need to make regarding the DRs or the bylaws, and what would be the most effective way to do it. And unfortunately for our residents, it's not going to be a quick process. And so I agree with Frank, we need to start down this road, but I think with all the complicated issues we're talking about, I think we need legal counsel on this one, and to find out exactly what we can and can't do, because I don't think any of us know for sure exactly what we can do.
All right, point taken. So real quick, Steve, you're next. Let me make one other comment. I think, Larry, to your point, that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're understanding, number one, the nature of the problem. Number two, what options can we do in the short term? And obviously, I think more importantly, what can we do in the long term from a legal perspective? Obviously, between the licensing for the county, between the rental contract, between the resident, the homeowner and the renter have to come into agreement, because obviously we'll need to be in lockstep, with anything that we change with regarding to our governing documents, and there's got to be a reference in the contracts. So there's a lot of administrative things that have to go along with that. But, and I'm saying this also for the folks that are attending the meeting, those are the kinds of discussions we're having right now. We're weighing all the options. We're throwing ideas out to see if they're feasible, number one, if they're legal, number two, and seeing if they're, quite frankly, enforceable. So, I just also want to set an expectation that we could have, a decision on what to do But I think we're still going to run into the question of how do we do it? Larry, I would agree with you that what's the vehicle? Should we, let's just say for argument's sake, that we go with the eviction route? Even though what's the vehicle that we use? Okay, so we know what to do. The question is how do we do it? Who does that? Those are the questions that have to be answered from an administrative perspective, from a legal perspective. What's the cost associated to you? What's the cost that the association would have to bear to take that action, and is it recoverable? So, these are kinds of things that it's going to be a very good discussion. We'll all, quite frankly, I'll just speak for myself, we'll all become more knowledgeable on these options and the feasibility of these options in order to not only protect the membership, but to protect the association as a whole. Steve, you're next. And then I actually there is a gentleman who's not on the board, obviously, that wants to make a comment. I will consider suspending Robert's Rules of Order. But Steve, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay, I would certainly support suspending Robert's Rules of Order to allow whoever it is to speak. In one of the county regulations, it says any person establishing, maintaining, renting, or operating any place as herein described without first obtaining a rental license or operating or maintaining the same in violation of this section of regulations or standards adopted by the county shall be guilty of a civil infraction. I'm not a lawyer. Maybe Cammie can chime in. I don't know what it means that they're guilty of a civil infraction, but to me that says there's something that can be brought to bear in this situation because they do not have a license. They're operating without one, and it would seem like there's something that could be done. The other thing I forgot to mention, my conversation with Chip, Chip said he wants to make an example out of this situation. I would suggest that maybe what we need to do is get a couple of the Abishire people, along with a couple directors. We sit down with Chip and Jim Bunting, the two commissioners that kind of represent our area, and let's find out what we can do legally to stop them from renting this property right now.
Yeah. See, very good point, and I agree. And I would absolutely support that approach, and certainly want to be part of that discussion because I do have a number of questions regarding those options. Let me state for the record, I would like to, unless there's a dissension here, I'd like to know Robert's Rules of Order for the next few minutes and recognize one of the meeting attendees. Any problem with that?
No.
All right. Fine. I'm going to consider Robert's Rules of Orders rescinded. There's a Mr. Bedell. You had your hand up, and so please unmute your microphone and please ask your question or join in the conversation.
Okay. Good evening, first of all. So I'm a manager of Borderlinks in the Pines, and I don't know much about Abishire or anything like that, but when you guys are doing this, I hope that you guys will keep in mind that when a property rents on Airbnb, we don't know the guest, right? We have them sign a contract or whatever, but we don't know them. So when we rent to them, they could be anyone. As a problem arises, I know for us, we handle that issue. And I would also hope that, it would be kept in mind that while we do rentals, at the same time, someone could say, hey, I got 2 people on Airbnb, and they could show up with 8. So, and we won't know that unless there's a problem that arises. So just when you're going back and forth with these ideas, remember a lot of times, the owner who rents is also blind as well in renting these units sometimes. That's all.
Mr. Burdell, thank you. Point well taken. I've got Frank and then Cammie.
Okay. Actually, Doug, first to Larry's point, I think that we have to attack this in sequence. And the reason I put the motion forward, Larry, the way that I did, and I sent a separate email, which is I've asked to be made part of the public record. What I think we need to do first off is find out community-wide what's the sense of how big this problem is. And more so than any other reason, because when we go to the commissioners and if we ask them for something special for Ocean Pines that can be enforced, I would think they're going to ask us one question. That is, beyond U7, how many people were in favor of this? So I think we have to do that. I'm 100% in favor of the work group, which I think we should start immediately and have legal people in there, because I can tell you from working on this in the past and trying to get fines, it's a very, very complicated thing. I mean, you would think it would be easy, but I will tell you, changing M01 took a year to get it done right. And it's going to be complicated. And still, if we don't work with the county, to Charles's point, you know, not everything's a problem, but when a problem shows up, I think the people on Abbyshire are probably, if I were on Abbyshire looking at, say, okay, great, you're going to do something in 6 months. What the hell are you going to do for me tonight?
Right.
You know, the noises tonight, I need somebody to act tonight. And that's what we have to find out that we can do. And that's what I think from what I've heard the county route is, but certainly we need to check that with Joe Moore and with our commissioners, because guys, I don't think we have a clue on how long a text legislation would take, what can go in it, what kind of penalties we can associate with it, and how to enforce it. And all that has to be figured out. And we need to figure it out now, because quite honestly, I just think looking at the current county piece of legislation, they were working on that long before last season. And here we are this season, and we have a piece of legislation that appears to be highly ineffective.
Yeah.
And I think if we don't get going on it right now, that we won't have something in place enforceable, I'm afraid, by next year. And that would be a tragedy.
Yeah. Frank, point taken. I would wholeheartedly agree with that approach. Cammie, you're next.
Okay, just a couple of things. The discussion that you want to have with the county commissioners and with our legal staff, I'd like to be a part of that. So I would throw my name into that. In the short term, I would ask that the police department of Ocean Pines be alerted to this situation over on Abbyshire, although I'm sure that they already are.
Yeah,
And that they have a presence over there and they intervene as appropriate. You talked about civil disturbances, Steve. The civil disturbances, again, that certainly can be leveled are those that have to do with trash, noise ordinance, and the things that are in 8 M, O, and S. So those are the things that we can enforce because they are in the DR section for 8. And I know we have a problems with fines, but we can enforce them, and that is in the DRs, and everybody gets them when they move in here, so they can't say they had no idea. But I am feeling very strongly about trying to find some remedy for the people over there because they are homeowners. And as Mr. Burdell said, when they get something from Airbnb, they don't know how many people are going to go there. They don't interview the people. They don't know the people. Well, let's, in addition to what you've done, Doug, send Airbnb a letter about what the capacity of these rental units are. And if they violate it, well, shame on them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, agreed. Other discussion?
Doug, one other point.
Frank, please.
One thing, John, I think John is part of this conversation, correct? He's
John
part of
is
the meeting.
there. Yes.
John, I think one thing we should do for the residents of Abbyshire, and we can do it starting tomorrow, we can almost immediately. I think it would be useful to sit down with the chief, you to sit with the chief, and ask him what county ordinances are in place right now that he could enforce with the police department on that property. I mean, is there something with parking? Is there something with noise?
Yeah.
And maybe the answer is no. And if the answer is no, it's no. But if the answer is yes, that's something that we could do immediately.
Yeah. Frank, I agree. And certainly, I'll certainly talk to John and just make that happen. I would have to sort of agree with your point that we don't know if they can do anything. If you read the county noise ordinance, and it measures, 55 decibels after a certain time in the evening. Well, who's going to measure 55 decibels? I mean, how do you do that? And how do you enforce it? And there was a comment that I think it was Mr. Fenn or somebody else just made or a little while ago that said, well, suppose it only lasts for 5 minutes and it wakes you up, and then does that really violate the noise ordinance rule? That's another question. These are notes that we're taking now, obviously, to have that kind of discussion, not only with the chief, but obviously as part of our work group, we'll need to discuss that with Jeremy and so on and so forth. And Cammie, going back to the point you made, is that, we can enforce them, but what do we do? I mean, in other words, let's say there's trash out there. Okay. Well, if we say you must remove all the trash by the end of the day, and they go, sorry, no can do. All right. And then, what do we do at that point? Because we don't have any governing documents that give us the authority to do anything else other than ask for their, consideration, so I think that's real. We really have to get some teeth in there. And again, go back to the conversation I had with Jeremy. We have to de-incentivize the Airbnb folks to say, by the way, if you happen to do what Mr. Burdell said, and that is, you put, you said there was only going to be 2 people there, and 8 showed up, and 3 more of their friends who just happened to be in town are also partying there that night, and now it turns into 15 people. You're going to be fined. But I guess we have to have that legal vehicle, and we have to have a process, that's in place, that's memorialized, that can be sustained, that can be communicated to the folks at Airbnb. Say, hey, when you write a contract, be aware there are very specific conditions, terms and conditions, but with renting a property here in Ocean Pines, and you must abide by them, or the following conditions that exist for enforcement, including fines and something else. Should we get some legal advice on an option that we may not be talking about right now? So,
good idea, Doug.
Other discussion. All right. So in closing, first of all, thank you everyone for, number one, the folks that brought the issue to our attention. I wish I had a better answer for you, saying that leaving with the idea that we can do something tomorrow. We certainly, have this as a high priority on our radar screen. I'm not going to set your expectations that everything will be fixed tomorrow, because it won't. But I think we now have the responsibility as a board to take this information and really generate the kinds of discussion, the kinds of options, and the kinds of solutions that we can put in place to ensure that, our residents don't have to put up with the kinds of things the folks at 91 Abbyshire are putting up with on a fairly regular basis now. So I think the meeting at on July 1st, the July meeting, has Frank's motion on the agenda, and I think that will allow us to continue this discussion. I think we've got a little bit more background information. I will offer that between now and then, we will open a dialogue with Chip again, just some more background information on this, and also as sort of preparation for any additional discussion we have on July 1. So Cammie, I think let's maybe offline, let's get together. I think that 3 or 4 of us ought to, actually it's only supposed to be 3 of us, can be on a work group that that kind of coordinates all this, keeps in contact with legal, keeps in contact with county, and keeps in contact with the residents to keep them abreast of how things are developing. So, Cammie, you had your hand up for one more thing, please.
No, you just answered it, Doug.
Oh, okay. All right. So again, I want to thank everybody that attended this meeting tonight. Thank you for bringing this issue to our attention. You have our undivided attention. I see Steve waving his hand, so I will recognize Mr. Tuttle, sir.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't wish happy birthday to Cammie.
Oh,
happy birthday.
Did you see my hat? I witnessed you guys tonight.
Yeah, I guess.
Actually, kudos to Cammie for the folks that are attending the meeting. She actually was so concerned about this meeting, she was going to come back earlier, and because she thought we might have to be in person to attend this meeting. And fortunately, we have the ability to do this meeting virtually, and we coerced her into staying away and attending the meeting virtually. So yes,
but she came home anyway.
No, that didn't work out.
It did?
We did come home.
Oh, Cammie, I'm so disappointed.
I'm going to tell you a brief anecdote, and then I'm going to go. For the last 66 years, it has always rained on my birthday. My father used to laugh hysterically about it because it always rained, at least for 5 minutes. So Paul and I are sitting on the beach in Rehoboth. It's a brilliant blue sky. It is just wonderful. And all of a sudden, wham, it poured down rain. And we looked at the radar, and there was one tiny little green blip, only one tiny little green blip, and it passed over. So I did get rain on my birthday. That's a sign of continued good luck and good friends and a good meeting. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Cammie.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So with that in mind, we'll close the discussion and I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So
No.
moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, voice vote? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Consider meeting closed. Thank you, everyone, fellow board members, and thank you, everyone that attended the meeting. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, Doug.
All righty. Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.